There are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. I know absolutely nothing about taxes, except that I have to pay them. But other than that, I do know more about death and dying than you would ever believe. And the reason that I know this is because I'm a clinical social worker who specializes in grief and loss. Now, when I tell people that this is what I do, I tend to get one of two reactions. The first one starts with a smile, albeit an uncomfortable one, and then they do this. As if something about working with death and dying is contagious. I believe they do this because they're uncomfortable. I know I was, but I'm not anymore. Which brings me to the second reaction. The other thing people do is they seem to hear what I do and they go, why? What's a nice girl like me doing in a profession like this? The truth is, I didn't find it. It found me. That's my brother Andy. He was killed by a hit-and-run driver. It was during a police chase, where the driver of a stolen vehicle went onto the sidewalk in an effort to avoid the police, and he was killed on impact. My life was changed forever. You see, even though I was already a social worker, I worked in a community setting. I never dealt with any kind of adversity, certainly not professionally, and most definitely not personally. So I had no idea how to do grief. What I did know was that I needed some support. Unfortunately, there really wasn't a lot out there. So I thought, I know how to do this. I'm a community organizer. I'm going to put on my community organizing hat, and I'm going to create some services. So I went to hospitals, palliative care, even social service centers. Then I went to a funeral home. And at this funeral home, I found out that they were starting a new program. The program was called Aftercare. It was a service to help families after there had been a death. I was absolutely intrigued, and I immediately applied for a position. And I was hired. At the same time, I went back to school, to McGill, and I completed a graduate certificate in loss and bereavement. For me, this would give me the theoretical foundation for all the work that I was going to be doing with families. So, for the better part of 5 years, I accompanied families through their grief process. I helped them fill out government paperwork. I connected them to social services. I even found places where they could donate clothing and furniture. Basically, I did everything I could to ensure that they did not fall through the cracks. When you think about it, what a brilliant service this is. Really? Why haven't we been doing this for 100 years? In any case, it was all the work I did with those families over the years, combined with the death of my brother, that shaped everything that I currently do today. And I'd like to share a few of the things I learned along the way. I got to admit, as a society, we suck at dealing with grief and loss. We have this death-denying mindset where we can't even use the words. We say gone, or lost, or passed away, or my personal favorite, expired. As if really we can compare someone to yogurt. For such a universal experience, why are we so uncomfortable? I know why. It's because we are covered in scars. SCARS is the acronym I created to help us understand why we grieve the way we do. I'll show you what I mean. The S, the first S in SCARS, stands for society. How does society define the death? Is it a socially acceptable one, like a long-term illness of an elderly person? Or is it a miscarriage where someone says, at least you can get pregnant? Or is it death by homicide or suicide? These deaths are socially negated and make people really uncomfortable to talk about. So they don't. Therefore, society's definition of a death can either help or hinder the grief process. C stands for circumstances. What were the circumstances surrounding the death? I've actually been asked, what's worse, a long-term illness or a sudden death? What? Neither. It's not a competition. One of my clients, I'll call her Sarah, she said it best. She said, today at the funeral home you're burying a 23-year-old, and that's a tragedy. My husband was 86, he lived a long life. But you know what? If we're both wearing tight shoes, your pain is your pain, and my pain is mine. So please, don't compare grief. Yours is all you know, and is equally as valid as anyone else's. A stands for ancestry. How was death talked about in your family? Was it a sweep it under the rug and conspiracy of silence? Or maybe you were told to stop wallowing in it, like one of my clients, I'll call him Michael. Michael came to see me because he thought something was wrong with him. It had been 6 months since his dad died, and he was still crying. Time out. I want to talk about crying for a minute. The first thing that someone says to me when they start crying is, I'm sorry. They apologize. Why do we apologize for crying? Because we don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. Well, let me ask you the question. If you've ever apologized for crying, wasn't the person worth crying over? Back to Michael. I'm going to tell you the same thing I told him. The next time one of your family members says, what's wrong with you? Why are you still crying? Ask them, what's wrong with them? Why aren't they? The R in SCARS stands for relationships. It's very different to bury a mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, cousin, uncle, grandparent, child, friend, or pet. Not better, not worse, different. Because it's really not about who died. It's about the relationship you had or didn't have and the meaning of that relationship. So I'll give you one more example. My client, I'll call her Heidi, she asked me, what's wrong with me? I cried more when my dog Bruno died than when my grandmother died. So I asked her, well, tell me about your relationships. And she said, well, my grandmother lived in another city. We didn't speak very often, and I saw her even less. But Bruno, my dog Bruno was there when I got married, and my dog Bruno was there when I had my first child, and my dog Bruno was there when I got divorced. Bruno was always there. So you see, again, it's not about who died, it's about the relationship and the meaning of that relationship. And the last S in SCARS stands for support. I mistakenly would ask clients if they had family members, and if they said yes, I figured, good to go, you have your support. Yeah, no. I could not have been more wrong. Support comes in many shapes and sizes, and as some of you may know, crisis brings out the best and the worst in people, and not just because you have a family member doesn't mean you have support. Support could be a good therapist, a good friend, an online support group. But just know that not having support will absolutely have an impact on the way in which you grieve. So you see, essentially, SCARS is a blueprint for how you grieve and why you grieve the way you do. It helps you understand that. Yet, even with that understanding, I am still most often asked the question, when am I going to feel normal again? the most difficult thing I ever say to anyone is that the person that you were is not the person that you are today. And even though I know that that sounds harsh, I know I'm not telling you something that you don't already know. The biggest challenge you have after someone you love dies is creating a life without that person. I call this creating new normals. How do we do it? Let's talk about it. Basically, you need to understand and begin by understanding that grief is a process, not an event. It doesn't just happen and unhappen. You don't get over grief. You learn to live with it. So while the literature would like us to believe it kind of looks like this, it starts off with shock and denial and disbelief, and then goes through a host of emotions, culminating in acceptance and relocating the deceased. I don't know about you, but for me, it kind of looked like this. It's complicated, and it's messy, and it's confusing, and it certainly doesn't follow any nice, neat little pattern. So when we think about grief, I'd like you to think about it or imagine it like this, as a roller coaster. Times that are more manageable, times that are more difficult. Sometimes it makes you nauseous, but it changes all the time. How much time? Well, it takes a full year to experience every birthday, holiday, anniversary season. Does that mean you're okay after a year? No. What it means is you now have the experience and the knowledge to know that you can make it through every birthday, holiday, anniversary, or season. With tears, with pain, but you can find your way. So it's really not about the time. It's about what you do with the time. Now add to that secondary losses. These are changes in roles that happen as a result of somebody in your life dying. So it could be you're no longer a partner, you're no longer a spouse, you're no longer a caregiver, and these losses need to be grieved as well. Add to that triggers. Triggers are those moments in time that you least expect, that they're unanticipated, like when you hear a song on the radio, or you smell a perfume, or a can of soup at the grocery store. And they hit you like in the gut, they take your breath away. But they come and they go, and they come and they go. So no, you're not going crazy, you're grieving. You want to know what else helps create new normals? Laughter. And I know that many people will think, I don't know if I can laugh, I don't think anything's so funny. Understand that laughter is a great stress reliever and wonderful for your health. So I want to give it a try. The comedian, Bob Hope, his wife asked him, "What would you like me to do with your remains after you die?" He said, "Cremate me, please. It'll be my last chance at having a hot, smoking body." Laugh loud and laugh as often as you possibly can. It's a wonderful coping mechanism. And then I would say probably the most poignant suggestion I'm going to make in creating new normals is finding ways of honoring the memory of the deceased, which could be in the form of creating a foundation or remembering to cook their favorite foods at holidays or at any time, or planting trees in their name. I'm even going to make one more suggestion. I invite you to do something that I did. On my brother Andy's 30th death anniversary, I wrote a blog. It was called 30 Years Later, 30 Reasons Why I Will Always Remember Him. And the response was incredible. People that didn't know him thanked me for writing this and sharing the memories and the stories. People that did know him, they used it as a platform for them to share their memories and stories with me. For even though death ends a life, it does not have to end the relationship. Ultimately, grief is like an open wound. it heals, but the scars will always remain. And the more pronounced the scar, the more profound the love. And if you understand that, you will have created your new normal. Thank you.